I call Dr. Rajim Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to make a contribution to the debate on the Prime Minister's statement, because what it does give me is an opportunity to show the stark differences between that side of the House, the national side of the House, and what Labor will do and this side of the House will do in government. And while the last member paints that in a particular way, it actually is very far from what is needed and what this side of the House would do. What that side of the House does is preach a particular brand of politics, which is the politics of arrogance, and what this side wants to do under a David Cunliffe-led government is something quite different. And I will explain that as I go. The John Key government is arrogant. There's no doubt about that. There's been plenty of that in display in the House today, Mr. Speaker, by the bucket loads, by new ministers and a few others. But that arrogance is palpable, and ministers show it. The Minister of Labour shows that every time he gets up. And today, those bounds were breached by the Minister for Immigration just a couple of hours ago. Mr. Speaker, I was reading Rebecca McPhee's Tragedy at Pike River over the holidays, and it's a good read, and anybody with a social conscience ought to read that. It's a classic case of how capitalists design spin around greed and actually drive it mercilessly to produce profit. That's what Pike River was about. When you follow the 10 to 15-year history of the company that set Pike River up, it was around greed and spin, and they drove it. They drove it with guile, they drove it with dishonesty, and they drove it with spin. They didn't care a damn what was going to happen, either to the environment in that area or those men who went down the mine. And look what happened. Look what happened. People paid for that with their lives. That is the politics of arrogance and the politics of spin that side of the House internalizes, and this side of the House will expose it every time. And whenever we come up with policies, as we have, the National Party will do what it has displayed in the House today. Its modus operandi is clear to see. Find the little holes, find the little bits that don't quite synchronize, find the bits that don't understand, but apply spin to it. And I say to the member from the back, many are quite new, members learning spin already, but there is so much spin. I say to that member that there is no little truth to it, and it is don't care a damn. And that's nowhere more palpable, Mr. Speaker, than when it comes to the most vulnerable. The Prime Minister's statements, Mr. Speaker, used 3 words. One was desperate. Yes, the government is desperate. They are desperate to match Labor on education. Education has been a mess. We've come up with policies. We're looking at it, and what they have done, they've now moved from that big thinking about national testing to what now is really performance pay by any other name. So by a small number of teachers going around schools getting paid $50,000 more each, the whole education system will change. It actually won't. We'll see plenty more of that. They're not putting our children first, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure they'll do that as well. They'll become desperate with our childcare policies, and they'll come up with something similar. They will. It's quite interesting, Mr. Speaker, that whenever this side of the House comes up with a policy and it costs some money, that is unaffordable according to the national government. That is unaffordable. But the same day, the same hour, they come up with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of expenditure. Oh no, that's investment. And that's the spin that side of the House puts up. When they spend it, it's investment. When this side of the House talks about spending, it's unaffordable. And that is intellectually dishonest, but they are used to that. That side of the House has been doing this branding for a long period of time, Mr. Speaker, and none of that is convincing. We know what they've done. They've given $1 billion with the tax cuts. They had to sell assets to pay for them, and now everything else has to take its place. They have made so many mistakes, Mr. Speaker, that now that desperation that they have is coming to the fore. Secondly, they talk about the divided. Yes, indeed, the government has divided this society. That's what it's done. The Prime Minister used the word divided. And they they take away from the poor, Mr. Speaker. Look at much of what government has done. It is taking away from the poor, it has divided our society, and it actually, look at all of the welfare reform programs. It is punitive. It is punitive towards the most vulnerable in our society. It also talks about delusional. Well, indeed, the government is delusional because they talk about running a surplus. They talk every day about running a surplus. But this is the government that has borrowed $55 billion in the last 5 years. $55 billion. And when they came into power, national debt was $10 billion. What is the national debt today? It is $65 billion. Oh no, but that's all the recession. That's all everything else. I will come to the Minister of Immigration in a minute, and I promise the Minister I will, because he was part of the arrogant brigade this afternoon, and I'll show him why that actually is not the way to do things. So that side is delusional. They are the ones who created a huge debt for this country, and it will take a Labour government to come into power and change that. But this side believes in the politics of conviction. And it is very, very different, a very different approach to that side of the House. And it's most evident when we look at the approaches to children. Indeed, when you look at this side of the House, and they might try to find little chinks in the armour, but there's no doubt about it, $60 a week for the most vulnerable with young children of 1 year old will make a huge difference. No doubt about it. And there are many outside there that are confirming it. Actually, actually looking to raise early childhood education, no doubt about it, it's going to make a difference in the lives of parents with young children. 25 hours. And that needs to include. And we will fund the building of early childhood centres. That's going to make a difference. Reverse the cuts, qualified teachers in early childhood education. Reverse that. But when it comes to paid parental leave, it's quite interesting. They were not interested. We know that it's paid parental leave that makes a difference. Parents with children make a difference. We know that early start for children makes a difference, which is why Best Start is designed by David Cunliffe. It will make a difference. And we know from the best science, we know from the beginning, the start that children get at home, the communities in which they live, and the resources that are provided, and the commitment that society shows. And if that's not done, then they suffer. So, but what that side of the House is happy to do is discount the children. Somehow they present this spin that we can do it through work. Well, it's going to take a long time for the parent of a child born today to actually get a job to make that difference. So there's a lot more that this government needs to do to convince anybody that it's not just the politics of spin. But I want to come to immigration for a moment. Here is a Minister of Immigration that is presiding over one of the worst rorts we've ever seen in New Zealand, than the job selling that's going on right now. Campbell Live exposed that, and there are many, many like that. People who are working in immigration, professionals, parents, businesses, have come to many of us to display those. But when that evidence is presented to that minister, Honourable Mr. Woodhouse, what he does, oh, well, they can come and complain. That minister shows no understanding of how that system works. Well, how will a person right in the middle of that system, minister, come and complain, and what's going to happen to them? So there's no appreciation. We have called for an inquiry. Have the conviction, minister, have the conviction to have an inquiry into that, made up of smart people, give people the protection so that minister can then learn what the actual rules are. That minister is presiding over the destruction of the reputation of a good country and a good system. And that minister, for some reason, finally I say to that minister is very used to throwing rocks today. But I say to the minister, have a look. There's nobody on this caucus that has been investigated for selling jobs. Nobody in this caucus. So don't go far from home. If you live in a glass house, don't throw stones. And I say to that member, there's a lot more that member needs to learn about immigration. Nobody will call you a minister, because the moment they do, what happens? Immigration currently does not have the resources to do the job. Immigration can't do this work. So I say to that side of the House, spin is, we get it nowhere, and we will expose it throughout the election campaign. Thank you.
Order. In accordance with the leave of the House, this debate is adjourned.